How are you today? So you're in Portland?
I am.
Okay. Not that
Yeah.
far away.
No, I know you're in Idaho.
Yep, in the Boise area.
We played Boise once,
Yeah.
and played what's it called? State Line, Idaho, um, at this heavy metal biker bar.
Oh, fun.
That was a lot of fun. Um, most
Do you,
interesting. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Most interesting culture shock being it had been many, many years since I've been in a public space that allowed smoking indoors.
Oh,
And the biker bar they smoked a lot, so it was like an old home week for an ex New Yorker like me walking into this like really spacious place. And by spacious I mean they had garage doors on either end that could be opened so that they could have bikers biking through. But with everything down in the evening, it smelled like this thick cloud of ashtray, and I was like, this is so nostalgic and fun. I love it.
oh my gosh, how funny. That would be a big shock for me too. I don't know if there's I'm sure there are probably places in Boise that do as well. I don't get out much. But I don't know if I would have the same reaction as you did. It's weird that when I was younger that was such a thing because I would think, especially as a singer, like, does that not affect your vocal cords?
My bandmates were worried that it would, and they said that they were rather husky by the end of the evening.
Yeah.
But I do have I have a good lung power, um,
Even
and
after that night?
it was fine. It was fine. I barely noticed it. I mean, I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but I do smoke other things every now and then, and
Mhm.
I was fine with it. By the way, I wanted to thank you for taking the time. You've interviewed quite a lot of rather interesting, notable personalities in recent months and years.
Yeah, yeah. I like to, I mean, I like what I like, and I didn't listen to much of the band before I was like, okay, I'm gonna reach out because even within the first, I mean, 30 seconds of the first song, I was already really, really digging it and excited. So it's the music that I actually usually prefer is kind of the more doomstoner rock, sludgy type progressive rock. But I at this point I like pretty much everything under the rock and metal genre, almost, not pretty much but almost. But yeah, it's kind of what I prefer anyways, and you guys do a great job of it. So yeah, automatically I'd had some extra time to be able to go through some emails that I normally don't necessarily have the time for, and I was glad that I did because you guys are great.
Right on, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So you still have, I mean, a month and a half before the album actually comes out. How long have you guys been working on it?
Uh, well, I would say we recorded it back in January of 2022. So it's been about a year. The delay would be between recording it and getting it out would, I guess, probably be best attributed to my perfectionism. I spent like 3 months working on the vocals until I was satisfied with them, and then multiple rounds of mixes until we were happy, multiple rounds of mastering that we were happy, and the gentlemen who respectively mixed and mastered it are professionals, and they did an amazing job. But I can't let things go.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and then just contacting Sheltered Life and setting up the whole scheme with them. But I don't like to get anything going until I have all my ducks in a row, and the album really needed to have all of its ducks in a row.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're putting something out there that's going to be forever out there, I don't blame you for really wanting to fine tune it all.
Mm. The additional aspect, as far as how long working on it, many of the songs predate the pandemic.
Mm,
Obviously, when the
wow.
pandemic hit, we went on pause, like most of the music scene in the world, and certainly in
Mhm.
Portland, Oregon. Would resume in the fall when everything looked rosy, and then the winter would come and we'd go on hiatus again. There were a couple of songs right before recording when we finally started resuming and said, okay, yeah, let's record, because worst case scenario, even if we get shut down by another pandemic, we'll have this out, that were written in the last couple of months as like, yeah, let's just have a few more options, something that's fresh. um the next single we have coming out, Bury Me, is one of those fresh ones, as well as the album's closing track, and we're pretty pleased with them. But curiously, there's one song which I guess will be our last single from the album, called Harbinger of Joy, that
Mm.
I wrote when I was 2021 in New York.
Oh, wow.
And I just never found a band for it. It never really clicked. And a couple of years ago, we were in practice, and I said, I think I remember the song from 20 years ago. Let me see if I could play it, and it just became one of our favorites.
So how has that been, bringing that back to life and being able to hear it full?
It has many different facets. One is very, very satisfying whenever any musical project or individual song reaches its fruition. Um, I don't really like, if it had been something I had done with a band before, I wouldn't have wanted to do it again, because once something's kind of reaches that fruition, I like to leave it where it is in time. But this one, it was long overdue. But it has the other curious overtone in that I wrote the song when I was turning 21. I was living in the East Village of New York, and it was pretty much launching into straight ahead alcoholism. I was
Mm.
at a separate fridge just for booze. I was drunk every single night, and I realized at some point this isn't sustainable, and I'm far too young to be on this path, especially with it being in my family. So I kind of put a pin in that, and I spent many years, mostly as an occasional stoner and still drinking, but not to that degree. But over the last, the 10 years that we've been with this band, and moving to Portland, and becoming a whiskey aficionado, um, our band just generally has this kind of love hate tug of war with alcohol, in
Mhm.
terms of how much we consume it, who is on the wagon, who's off the wagon, what is functional versus not functional.
Right.
And the song itself is framed like a romance. The lyrics are a double entendre of romance and alcohol. So I guess we're just hyper aware of how contextually appropriate it is for us, and especially us right now.
Oh, interesting. So it not only was it something that you wrote 20 years ago that you identified with at that time, but there's still like another layer of it, with adding in other band members as well. That's really interesting. Doesn't happen very often. So that's like a um yeah, multi-layered song. That's really interesting. I'll be interested to go back and listen to it again now knowing that. You mentioned Bury Me. That's the one that gets stuck in my head the most. I'm curious about the lyrics though. Do you give me some insight into the lyrics? It's one of the catchiest choruses, but I can tell there's a lot of depth to it.
Um, I've never been terribly interested in writing political songs. I've always been much more interested in things that were either very personal or fantastical, um, or just taboo. But it's difficult living in Portland, especially, but just living in America over the last, 2, 5, 10 years,
Hmm.
um, to not be affected by it.
For sure.
I think the first, and that speaks to the title of the album, Hard Truths, is tied into both the overriding topic matter of much of the songs, of which Bury Me is an example, but also just the times. The Whipping Boy was the first song that was written, which was pretty much on Trump's rise to power. And Bury Me continues it. Bury Me is inspired mostly by doom scrolling,
Mm.
um, which I admit very much.
We're all guilty of at one point or another.
We are. I think I'm a little bit more guilty of it to the extent that I've always wanted to live in interesting times. Ideally, I would live to see, and I don't want to see, I don't like the idea. The only thing that bothers me about dying is that the story of the human race will continue
Mhm,
and I won't see it. And it's just getting really interesting.
mhm.
And I, so when I'm doom scrolling, there's this aspect of like, this is all horrible things and people should be less horrible and we should stop the horribleness. And also, that's fascinating. Um, I think Bury Me is that combination of
Okay,
that
that makes
idea of
sense.
I don't want to see this, I don't want to live through this, I don't want to be a part of this. But if you do bury me, could you at least keep my eyes and ears above ground? Because I'm still fascinated to watch this.
Oh my gosh, what an interesting visual to
The
that.
first,
And that's kind of not necessarily on a political level that I had latched onto, but definitely was like, hey, I just bury me. I don't want to have anything to do with this. But yet I kind of am curious enough that I kind of want to see and smell what's going on. So that's funny. That's very well portrayed because definitely what I got out of it. And usually when it comes to lyrics, some unless they're like completely black and white, you could have one perception and the artist can have a totally different reason for singing or saying whatever. So yeah, you delivered that one really well.
thank you. Thank you. The first, because the song's broken out in those two parts, and the first verses and choruses are specifically about that. The last part, where it speeds up,
Uh-huh.
is just all puns on essentially America's divorce, which is all framed like a wedding,
Right.
which of course is coming apart, because it really feels like that America's getting a divorce, or
Right.
or just they're
We're
barely
stuck in the
sticking
middle.
around just for the kids.
Right. We're the ones that are stuck in the middle of, yeah, that's funny. I mean, it's not funny. There's nothing really funny about it, but you have some of those things you just kind of have to, when it's outside of your control, you just kind of have to sometimes get like a dark sense of humor about it because it can feel so heavy and so, you know, agonizing that you have to just kind of go, well, we've been through crazy stuff in the past. Let's just hope this is another one of those crazy things we'll get over. Oh my goodness. Um, let's see, what is the one right after that? Listen to the rain.
Oh, letting in the rain.
Letting in the rain. Listen to the rain. I like to listen to the rain. That's probably why I said that. Letting in the rain. I really that was the first one that um when I listened to the whole album all the way through, that's the first one that really stuck with me. Like Bury Me is the one that gets that like that I'll think about and think about and think about. But that one was the one that immediately really called my attention in a different way. Tell me about that one.
Um, I'm a big fan of the fact that it made it onto the album. By itself, on its own, the my wife is a huge horror movie aficionado. Um, a very huge horror movie aficionado, and at the same time, she can be rather, I guess, that the part of the movies, but also just living in an increasingly dangerous city, makes
Mm,
her also a bit paranoid,
yeah.
and the two can feed into one another. So the song is at its root about the paranoia, and every verse is taking something that's happening that's somewhat um, harmless, like the rain, or the wind and such, and then interpreting the worst possible thing that it could possibly be. I wrote it on an acoustic guitar, which is not uncommon because we also play acoustically and have that acoustic album. Um, but I brought it into The Gentleman as an electric song, and I was like, so this is kind of hard because normally it's much more solid parts, but I want you all to just kind of play a moody thing going on here. Some moody, it's a drone on bass for the most part. The guitar is going to be doing a lot of just ebo and weird things, and it's all a mood piece. And it took a lot of convincing. At one point, one of them even said, "Are we doing this just to prove that we can? I don't understand how this fits in with anything. I don't know why this is us." And I said, "Listen, trust me. Just every time you doubt me, eventually you come along. So just trust me on this." And we recorded it. It was one of the harder ones to record, because of the time and the feel. You just have to
Mhm.
feel it all.
Oh yeah.
But when we did it and we started multi-tracking these ebo guitar solos with delay and the general feel of the whole thing, and after we got the rough mixes and they came back about a week later, it's like, "So what does everybody think? Any favorites jumping out?" And I had a lot of just grudging, "Listen, I'm going to admit it's one of my favorites. It's a standout. It worked.
It is.
It worked well." So it was a long shot Hail Mary kind of thing that worked out right. We've only we've played it acoustically once and a couple times, but we've only played it electrically and heavily once, because when we most of our sets are pretty straight ahead, and we like to just kind of keep the high energy going. You really need a really expansive set to say, "Okay, now we're just going to take everything for 5 minutes and drop it down to this whisper like level, and then we'll kick ass again."
All right.
Um, but we do really enjoy, and I'm especially pleased on an album that's relatively long, that it's one of the ones that breaks up. Uh,
Mhm.
there's not a lot of similarity from song to song, but it's definitely one of the greater departures.
Yep, I agree 100% with that. I mean, it is a very diverse album all across the board, but that one does definitely have a different, obviously, melody and feel, but yeah, it still fits. I don't feel like it's like completely out of place by any means. It's and maybe that's what does pull it more forward because it does have a little bit of that shift. But I love it. I think it might it's probably my favorite on the album, and that's really tough to say because I like all the songs. Um, but it's one that's really easy to get lost into.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah, it's a cool album. It starts off, really aggressive, and that's what got me right off the bat I know that these are fellow people in your area, but I almost heard right off the bat like a Red Fang thing, and I love Red Fang, and so
Mm.
right off the bat I was like, oh, that has a Red Fang feel. But then the more the album goes on, the less it is, the more it's definitely separate from that Red Fang feel. But that song is super dynamic too, and just comes out and all right, let's go. You don't even get like a chance to warm up. It's just like go time.
Yeah, that opener, "Guts of a Beggar," that was the challenge of write an Opeth song. I'm like, okay.
Oh geez, that's easy to do.
It started from the quiet part. The quiet part was written on an acoustic guitar, and then it just kept. Well, what would go before that? What would go after that? What could come next? And then eventually, it took us one of the longest to learn, and it was definitely one of the few that in jamming out in the room were like, "And how does this end?" We know we can just keep putting things on, but when does this stop? And I was like, it stops with the triplets and the cut time on the drums. That's what it is. It has to get as heavy as possible. Uh,
Oh, how creative. That's so interesting that you started in the middle and added things to both sides. That's so interesting. I don't know if that's something that bands do very often. I've never asked that question before, but that's really interesting to me. It's almost like, I mean, I guess, writers sometimes that's how, just like writers of books, sometimes that's how they operate. So I guess it kind of is the same idea. That's interesting though.
I'm super curious how, and I wish I knew more, how so many different musicians write their songs, and so many different bands. I've seen so many different formulas for
Right.
how a band puts together a song from, and where it all gestates. And what I think one of the most beautiful aspects of it is I can remember with that particular song how it started, but there are so many others that I'm like, I have no idea how I wrote this. I don't remember coming up with it at all.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think when I've asked like similar questions, I think most people start with like one instrument and come up with a melody, and then everybody just kind of amplifies upon that. But with starting with a slower melody and then going, okay, let's do something faster on top of that, and then like that's where it makes it a little bit different from what I've heard.
Mm. Well, if you were setting out to write an Opethy song, I think it would be a little weird to move towards the intricate, quiet part.
Right. I guess that's very true.
But I could be completely wrong. I don't know.
Hmm. If I
A
ever
lot of the
end
songs, it should be noted, start with, I think I'll write this type of song. Um,
So you have an idea of what you want it to sound like going into it, and then you're like, all right, how do I make that happen?
I have a mood, and yes, a
Oh,
mood, and then or an inspiration, and then that starts happening. I think "Bury Me" um, was more of I want something that sounds Melvinsy, and it should be particularly chromatic, and that may I don't know if that worked out, but that's what was the inspiration was. Um, and usually the inspiration ends up being just this tiny little part of the whole thing.
of
Like
course.
the last song, "Unliving," has death metal vocals during the slow section, which I attribute to being a big fan of the band Incantation.
That's cool. Yeah, and it starts off that way, doesn't it? Isn't that yeah, that's the one that starts off with a heavier vocals.
Yeah, we thought about like, oh, maybe that one should be a single, but we're like, no, this would be a lot of people hearing us for the first time, and it's a misrepresentation to have.
Right.
We do death metal vocals here and there throughout different songs, but it would be a misrepresentation to have a song start off with two verses of them, and then end with death metal vocals as well. They get the wrong impression.
Right. Then they're like, okay, let's see the rest of this. And is this the same singer? Yeah, I can see that. That's cool though that you have that diversity. But so are you doing those vocals as well?
Yeah, I do all the vocals.
Wow, you have a really diverse vocal range.
Thank you. We had a show somewhat recently where a person came in cold and just happened to see us, and he asked me after the show. He's like, "How do you do the three voices?" And I was like, "I've never thought of it that way before."
Oh yeah.
Um, uh, but in the same way that I enjoy variety in everything in life, and especially in music, it just I don't know. It just always seemed obvious for any given part that like, oh, it should be sung like this, and if I just keep trying it long enough, I'll get better at it till the point where it works.
So you just are like, okay, I'm just gonna try to emulate what I'm thinking, and you just that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's best if you don't overthink it or pay attention to what the notes are, because then it just makes you because then you don't go, oh, I can't do that. It's
Right.
you just try it, and then hopefully 6 months later when you finally listen to it, you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad.
That works. That works. So, have you ever taken any vocal training, or are you just all self-taught?
uh Pretty much all self-taught, yeah.
Wow.
uh,
Yeah, you carry those notes really well too with I don't know anything about singing as far as the right correct verbiage or whatever, but you carry the singing clear, clean vocals very, very well. So I assumed that you'd had some vocal training.
it's I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, and it's definitely what I when I listen to myself from say 15 years ago or something, and I think to myself, what was I thinking? Why did I think that was good? At least now, pretty much how I think I am and how it ends up actually being is a lot closer than it used to be. It took a long time of experimentation before I could be pretty consistent.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and with those three voices, I think that's a pretty interesting way of saying it. With those three voices, I mean, you're having to perfect like three different versions of you, right?
Mm, yes.
Yeah. Where do you usually find your influence with the lyrical components?
I don't know. I don't really have any direct influences as far as other artists, though
I guess I more so mean
the topic.
um books, movies, personal stories, like more that than yeah, than other vocalists.
I don't know, which is a weird. I guess there are times. I think usually what happens is one of two things. That I'll start a song, and then a lyric will just jump out at me. Usually the first line of the song, and often it'll inspire something, an idea that I then pursue. And I'll usually end up keeping the first line of the song, even if it makes no sense compared to what the rest of it was, because it
Hmm.
was what inspired it. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes, often I'll write this music first, and then just spend a week with it in my head until something jumps in. The "Bury Me" line, just that chorus jumped in. Um, the "Guts of a Beggar." I've always been a big fan of Hamlet, but also
Hmm.
is largely inspired by the situation with homelessness in Portland.
Yeah.
Um, but "Unliving" and "In Falling Bodies" are a good example of when I don't know what to write about and I am drawing a blank. I'll ask my bandmates, I'll say, like, throw out an idea. And with "In Falling Bodies," our drummer Sean said, like, well, you read that article about the black holes? You should write about black holes. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. There's no way I'm writing about, well, that isn't. And then I start reading up on it, and I'll usually read up on a topic as much as I can, discuss a topic with a bunch of people as much as I can until I get a whole bunch of influences and perspectives. And slowly it'll start to gestate. And when I have just an overwhelming amount of stuff on the brain about it, is when I'll sit down and usually tear it off in one sitting once it's inspired enough.
Yeah.
Um, the "In Falling the Bodies" with the black holes, once I realized that it was kind of like a romance, and especially when I read enough physics to understand that if you were at the point when two black holes met, time gets frozen there, and it feels like a single instant. You wouldn't know that time is frozen, but it would last an eternity. So if you frame it as a romance, it's love at first sight that lasts forever.
Ah,
With "Unliving," I had that one. That sat a while, and I didn't know what to write about. And people kept saying, "Well, write about the pandemic. Write about the pandemic." And it's like, I'm totally not going to write about the pandemic. It is the most obvious, boring subject. We've all been submitted to it enough. And then it occurred to me that viruses are considered somewhere between living and not living, which the 2 years of isolation felt like. We're
mhm.
alive, but we're not.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, okay, now that's something I can grab. I can grab onto that comparison between our lives and the virus itself. Throw in some Egyptian mythology, and I made sure to start the lyrics off with "of course," to as a to concede the fact that, okay, yeah, it's about the pandemic. So it usually comes by a lot of different routes, but for the most part, I get topics from people and then just run with them, or I wait until an overwhelming amount of inspiration is and in influences and information are in my head, and then I can sit down and take them and finish them.
That's cool. That's cool. So with some of them, you go through and do a bunch of research and reading up on it in order to get to um to enhance that inspiration.
Yeah, a critical mass of peripheral knowledge and
Ah,
context. Yeah, like
that's
we had a song on our acoustic album called "Empty Kettle," which was ostensibly a true story about my wife tearfully asking me to tear up her rose bushes.
mm,
And when the comparison about being emotional and unemotional came in, and realizing that I was tearing things up, I was like, oh, this is like the Tin Woodman of Oz. So I read that book. Um, and then it became, all right, it's the tearing up the rose bushes story, but informed by a lot of the context that was in the standalone book, The Tin Woodman of Oz.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I mean, that's sad, but that's cool that you linked the two, stories together and were able to, like you said, take a fantastical approach on top of something that was very real and very personal. Do you like to read a lot?
I do. I don't get as much time to read as I wish I did, but I do like to read, and I definitely turn to reading when I'm looking for lyrical inspiration.
Yeah. What are some of your favorites or a author that you really like?
My favorite author is definitely Vladimir Nabokov.
Oh, no, he's a classic writer, isn't he? I know that name.
He's 20th century. He's most famous for Lolita,
Oh, okay.
which I happen to be rereading right now.
Oh, nice.
And other than that, H.G. Wells.
hmm
And then I just kind of bounce around to everything. I'll read a D&D manual and some comic books, and then I'll read something on religion or drugs. And my wife works in a bookstore, so
Oh,
she'll like
nice.
give me various different fiction, or just spending a lot of time on Wikipedia as well. I like context, and I like to keep my reading as diverse as everything else.
You just, yeah, like to, it sounds like it, like to consume a lot. That's great. I like to read a lot too. H.G. Wells science fiction, right? So yeah, you're like all over the board. D&D, we actually play D&D as well. And so that's funny that that's something that, I mean, that's one of the most creative outlets that you can possibly even come up with, not only for just an escape, right? But yeah, for some inspiration. That's cool. Do you play?
Occasionally,
Yeah.
and I'm working my way up to being a DM. I'm about
It's a lot
to
of work.
run a 1 or 2 session indie RPG called Merkborg.
Huh.
That's basically like D&D, short on rules, long on the apocalypse.
That's awesome.
It has lines like "Give your character a name if you wish. It won't help you." And I'm inviting
Don't
people with
get
the
too
idea that
attached.
there's going to be 2 sessions. You'll all probably die.
Oh my gosh. That's
Um,
funny. Oh my gosh. Yeah, two sessions. Hopefully I wouldn't get too attached to my character before they meet their doom. But I've been playing one character for, gosh, 3 years now, and I'm just terrified that something's gonna happen to him. Like I have like a serious emotional connection to him at this point. Like it's like he's an extension of me. So I'm like, please don't. I keep telling my husband, if you kill him, then we're done. Like, see,
and considering how passionate some people are, you're probably in the middle to low range as far as attachment to one's character.
that's probably very true, right? Yeah, I would definitely cry, but I would get over it. I think I don't know. I guess I don't know. The other one I've only been playing for probably about a year and a half, and I'm just not as attached to her yet. But I don't know if it's just because he was kind of my introduction or not. But
I wanted
um,
I wanted to ask you a question.
sure.
Based on the things that you've reviewed, the things that you've put in your top 10 lists, I'm guessing that you're at least a little bit of a Mike Patton, Mr. Bungle fan.
Just a little bit. I'm just a little bit of a fan. Yeah, I'm a huge Mike Patton fan.
My foundational albums from when I was a kid that informed me musically were Black Sabbath, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath,
hmm
Sabotage, and the first Mr. Bungle album.
Yeah,
Which respectively told me this is what I love the most, and this is why you can break every rule, or you don't have to adhere to any rules.
right.
Um, so I guess I'm curious, do you hear any Patton-esque kind of stuff in us? Because I never know. I can't be objective.
Yeah, I think with his eyes, lyrics, like some of them are very like um profound and easy to follow, and other ones you're just like, I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. I feel like you guys hit the more profound part of that. I don't feel like you guys just and on I don't know much of your I know we're like getting close to running out of time.
I wanted to
Um
let you know that I could. This is a restriction of Zoom. I can start a new session if you wanted to.
oh okay, cool, cool. Yeah, I don't know if you know this. I'm a therapist outside of this. And so I have like the full or my boss paid for like the full thing for Zoom because that's what I use for work. So if we ever end up doing another interview in the future, I can set it up so that way we don't have to have the brief interruption.
Mhm.
But yeah, so in that aspect and with the having different ranges, I mean, we know Patton's vocals are insane. He can go from he just has an insane vocal range, but you do have the different ranges. Um and Sabbath, I can definitely hear that in the musical aspect as well. Um, Obviously, we know Mr. Bungle has like the most chaotic and bizarre musical components that I don't know how they make it work. I don't know how they do it. Your guys's is definitely much more fluid. Definitely not chaotic like theirs can be. So yeah, I definitely can hear the influence and some similarities. Absolutely.
In picking through the things that you had highlighted, I was like, oh, okay, I could see maybe why we caught your attention a little bit as opposed to because there's a lot of people that we're not modern metal,
Hmm.
we're classic metal. We're all over the place. I don't know what genre we are, and we've changed genres throughout our career, and it's sometimes very difficult to find footholds.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's difficult anyways in the musical world right now because there's so much, it's so much easier to put out than it was before. And so that makes it almost really flooded. So it's hard to um have something that's going to hit someone right away. And I
Absolutely.
do, I get lots of emails every day, and I am so thankful for it. But I have a full time job. I don't get to go through them as much as I would want to. So and sometimes it will be, you know, 30 seconds in a song, and it's not fair that I don't have the time to really digest some of the albums, um, but it was one that got me right off the bat, so I didn't need to take that extra time.
Do you want to contact me back?
Sure.
Okay.